I try to be really rational. A lot of people don't. They want to balance emotion and heart. And I'm not always rational. Nobody is. But I think I'm a lot more rational than most. And if you're somebody who's more interested in a more emotion-driven life, this video is not for you. But if you aspire to a more rational life, this is how I've done it. I don't want to be preachy. I don't say you should do this, you should do this. But I will tell you with complete honesty all the things that I do to try to be more rational. And you pick and choose what, if anything, you like. So it starts with a foundational belief in something called utilitarianism. I try to make every decision, every moment, based on what is going to be best, not just for me, but for my sphere of influence. It could be locally, my family, my friends, my clients. But I also like to think big in terms of whoever might be reading or listening to, or the beneficiaries of money I would donate. I'm thinking about what's going to do the most net good. Now, that's normally associated with communism. It is famously Marx's statement, from each according to their ability, to those according to their need. Give to everybody. That's going to make the biggest difference. No, even that is inaccurate. I really believe that utilitarianism is what in the long term, not just in the short term immediately, but what is going to make the biggest improvement to gross, let's call it gross world happiness. And you can't always affect that, but I really try to make every decision that way, every moment. Choosing to spend, it's now 9:16 a.m. on October 23rd, 2022, choosing to spend this half hour, whatever it's going to take me, to make this podcast, this YouTube video, is my decision that it is the best use of my time. I could easily just hang out with my wife, or play with my dog, or watch TV, watch even some news show. But I believe the best use of my time, the best use of these heartbeats, the best use of these minutes, is making this video, given my abilities, my limitations, my preferences, and where I can make the biggest difference. I use that kind of thinking when I decide where I'm going to shop. I shop on Amazon a lot. I do feel bad for the small business owners that are getting squashed by Amazon. But I think about the larger good in terms of efficiency of my use of time and thereby freeing me to do other good things. I'm thinking about rewarding excellence. Amazon is excellent in terms of its interface, its delivery, excellent. And I want to reward excellence. To me, that ultimately, long-term, is utilitarian. It yields the greatest good. I think about in terms of food prep. Do I like delicious, complex food items that I could cook? I'm not a bad cook or baker. No, I think about where could my time be most effectively used. So I'm not, because creating food for me is going to do no good for my sphere of influence. So I make simple but delicious things that take almost no time to prepare. Like I'll typically have yogurt for breakfast, or oatmeal when it's cold. A salad that I put together with my favorite half dozen ingredients for lunch. A broiled piece of chicken or something with another salad, or steamed vegetables. Things that are really fast. Because then I have more time from a utilitarian perspective to make a difference. And I swear to you, I'm not saying this because I want to seem holier than thou. It is what I believe is core to the life well led. Even things like introspection. People like me, I'm a career and personal coach. We kind of encourage introspection. Well, I don't encourage too much of it. I always just enough to say, okay, can I learn anything from this past experience? What can I do moving forward? I'm not a believer in therapy and constantly revisiting what your mother did to you, father did to you, spouse did to you, etc. I spend minimum time introspection and maximum time thinking about what is the next thing, how should I spend this next moment, minute, hour to make the biggest difference from a utilitarian perspective. That affects how I give charity. What charity is going to yield the biggest difference? It's easier for us to watch those commercials and feel horror. And I love doggies, but see the starving doggies, donate to the ASPCA, or the starving kid in Africa. But when I think about what's going to have the biggest utilitarian effect, what's going to affect the world the most, it's not that. It's giving, in my judgment, to low-income gifted kids. It's funding underfunded basic genetic research that's not funded by the government because it doesn't pay off right away, or by the drug companies. I believe in the power of gene understanding the genome very basically from the ion level up, from the gene level up, I should say. That ultimately that will most augment humankind, whether it be disease or maybe, who knows, eventually we'll be able to genetically improve our altruism or our intelligence. I'm always thinking about it, and that's where I donate my money. I think in terms of who I spend my time with. I have very few friends. I have a few. And we spend it, they're very carefully curated for being very intelligent and therefore and altruistic, wanting to make a difference in the world. And that can be from a liberal or conservative perspective. And I even spend my time with them very efficiently. We talk usually I have about a half dozen people whom I talk with individually for about a half hour every 2 weeks by phone, rather than even Zoom, so I don't have to have my game face on. And we generally help each other to try to be more effective in the world and therefore make a big difference. I have excised out of my life people, including a family member, completely excised one family member who I believe is a terrible use of my time, and have minimal interaction with somebody else in my family who I believe is a relatively poor use of my time. And I spend my time either alone, writing, thinking, with my clients, working, where I feel I'm making a difference, making videos like this, and with the half dozen people who I believe are really also likely to make a huge difference. And I meet with them individually. I also have a board of advisors, people I organized 10 years ago, a group of people who we meet for 1 hour by teleconference every month. And we simply ask people, okay, who's got a problem they want the group's input on? Again, huge, from a utilitarian, make a big difference perspective. That's how I spend my relationship time. It also applies to emotion. I have a friend, not a close friend, but a friend, who has advanced cancer, is going to probably die. And I choose to not spend much time with this person because there's nothing I can do about it. It would drain me emotionally and be utilitarianly very poor. I used to teach special ed kids. I was a school psychologist way back when in the 70s. And I made that utilitarian decision that was not the best use of my ability. I love working with gifted adults. That's who my people are. Really smart, really well-intentioned people in the public sector, private sector, doctors, college presidents, lawyers, researchers, who want to make the most of who they are. That's good use of my time. I'm fortunate. I've been with my wife for 50 years now, 47 years of marriage, and 3 years before, living in sin. My wife is great. I've chosen to spend my entire life with her. I'm grateful for Barbara Nemko. Kind, intelligent, ethical, beautiful. She's aged beautifully because she stayed skinny, and she looks great, 112 pounds. I'll stop there with the relationships. But, okay, what else? Levels of perfectionism. I think this video is a good example. I try to titrate how useful would additional time be spent. I made an outline of the topics I wanted to talk about, certainly didn't script. That to me represents the ideal balance of preparation and but not spending so much time so I'm free to do the next good thing. So I had this outline, and now I'm just talking to you, which has the side benefit of clearly being authentic. Hopefully it's clear to you that I'm being as authentic as I can possibly be. And it's also more fun. Scripting is hard, and it also leaches chemistry. There's a person I admire quite a bit. His name is Victor Davis Hansen. He's quite a scholar. He's a senior scholar at the Stanford University's Hoover Institution. A brilliant writer and thinker and contrarian in many ways. And I believe that, by the way, that's an important utilitarian view that I hold. It is comforting to opine in the direction that most people are believing in. So right now we are a big believer in egalitarianism, redistribution at least among us. The have-nots take from the haves, where anybody who has anything is privileged, anybody who doesn't is deserving. I think that's foolish, but it's in the zeitgeist. So I've tried to do my writing and talk, my public talking, etc., to balance that out, to present an argument in favor of merit-based decision-making, merit-based allocation of resources. And that's what this Victor Davis Hansen guy does. It's intelligent, it's benevolent, but it's not just being another grain of sand on the beach. From a utilitarian perspective, I'm very pro-choice, and I'm very very pro-gay marriage, and I'm very anti-materialism. But to write about that, I'm merely a grain of sand on the beach. I'm one voice in a very large choir. It doesn't add any value it's not adding to the gross world happiness. But if I argue for merit, which is under-discussed, or focusing on genomics and the basic of genomics, especially for things like intelligence, that is counter to the zeitgeist of the era, but it is ultimately extraordinarily utilitarian to making the world better. So part of my philosophy is to focus on what is not popular but is nonetheless wise, if not dispositively true, is wise to at least express myself. Unfortunately, social justice warriors exert the 3 C's on people who dare say things that are contrary to the zeitgeist. The 3 C's are censure, censor, and cancel. I think that's a horrible, horrible vector affecting humankind and is really making the world worse, for sure, in the long term. It's virtue signaling. It feels really good to slam people down if they don't agree with the conventional wisdom, but ultimately it is extraordinarily devastating to a society, reducing us to a lower common denominator. My views on education in terms of being highly rational. I do believe, and I've written about this widely, that college is America's most overrated product. All of education is. Most of the research shows limited ability to transcend the effects of other factors like genetics, parents, peers. The amount of benefit that for the enormous amount we spend on education is very low. At the college level, it started way back in the 60s when the Coleman report came, a big government report by liberals, found that it didn't make much difference. Head Start in 2010, President Obama wanted more funding for Head Start, so he commissioned a meta-evaluation, of the evaluation of Head Start, and its definitive results were no difference in the long term. Terrible use of taxpayer money. I know that's uncomfortable, but it's true. Education is overrated. The fact that teaching is one of the few professions where you get tenure for life after 2 or 3 years is crazy, because it is a burnout profession. And so it's easy to be either lazy or impatient with students or not up to date, and yet the unions will protect teachers forever, which result in kids getting damaged year after year after year after year. The rational, utilitarian approach is certainly not to have tenure for teachers. And in higher education, what's venerated in professors is research productivity, and that is often orthogonal. That's inversely correlated with quality of teaching, because the attributes required to be a great teacher are not the same as somebody who's going to be an abstract researcher researching on some little narrow area, which he or she is then tempted to promulgate to his undergraduate students or even graduate students when it's ultimately too narrow. When what undergraduates need are transformational teachers who are wonderful at conveying the basics and in a way that incorporate critical thinking and writing skills and good mathematical reasoning skills, probabilistic reasoning skills into their day-to-day life. And the definitive studies of value added show that there is very little gain for a large percentage of students, college students, in those critical areas of critical thinking, writing, reasoning, etc. I believe, for me, and I have a PhD from Berkeley in the evaluation of innovation, and yet I believe that whenever I want to learn something, and I wanted to learn, for example, hybridizing roses that don't need to be sprayed with any pesticides and all that crap. So I didn't go back to school for a PhD in botany, which most of the professional hybridizers do. No, I went and read a lot, and I visited world-class hybridizers and asked questions, and then I started working at it and doing my own hybridizing and asking questions. And I have now commercial roses on the market, even though it's a very part-time thing for me. That is a rational approach to learning. One-on-one, study what you need to know, what you want to know, when you need it, getting help one-on-one from practical masters when you need it. I came up with 30 years ago, what I believe is a truly breakthrough idea for education that was going to really make a difference. And I call it super teachers. And it's easier now than ever. We find, say, like Introduction to Algebra, a gateway course is seen as really important, or Introduction to Computer Coding, or whatever. And you find not just the most PhD-laden persons, but somebody who's a transformational teacher who has the gift of being able to transform students. And I do not have that, by the way. But finding that person and having, or a group of them, 3 or 4 of them, and have them divide up the Introduction to Algebra course or the Introduction to Programming in Python or whatever it is, and have them teach that transformational course in interactive modules online, gamified. So and then you can make that available to every student in the world, from Azerbaijan to Zambia, in America, from Maine to Southern California, so that every student, rich and poor, gets access to world-class transformational interactive instruction at an individualized pace, and it can be translated into every language. It's a slam dunk idea, and I've made prodigious efforts to get it promulgated. I've written articles in the Atlantic, in U.S. News, in Washington Post, Psychology Today, sent those articles to leaders at the federal U.S. Office of Education, and in my own state where I happen to know, I knew a former state superintendent of schools. It went nowhere. Crazy, irrational humankind. But I felt that was a really good, rational use of my time. It just didn't pay off. Now some words about, I guess I should let our listeners take a break. My announcer, those of you who listen to this on the podcast, like to hear an announcer. So I'm going to just take a brief break, just 10 seconds. Listen to the announcer spiel for 10 seconds, no commercial or anything, and I hope you'll stay with me, and I'm going to talk about my hopefully rational views on materialism, about investments, about choosing music, about travel, about dying, and about death. Please stay with me. Okay, so as promised, I want to talk now about materialism. It is irrational, unless you're just fabulously wealthy, to spend the incremental difference of cost, of housing cost, on a fancy neighborhood versus a somewhat crime, not infested, but crime relatively heavy neighborhood. I'm going to speak only where I live. Of course, I got lucky. Here I got lucky. I came of age when housing was cheap. So I did buy my house in what was just a plain middle-class neighborhood for a very modest amount of money. Now, because it happens to be near public transportation and good shopping, it is worth a lot of money. But I'm not going to move because I do have a lovely location here now. But if I was starting out, I think the rational choice, because I want to have the freedom. I don't get paid to do this. I'm going to make zero from You'll notice there are no ads on this video or anything else I do. I make a middle-class living as a career counselor, but that's it. But I'm free. If I was if I had to, housing is the biggest expense. Housing and higher education could be the biggest expense. And with housing, I would live in a dicey, I like to use that word, neighborhood in a small place. If I wasn't, I might even live with my parents if I wasn't married. I would save so much money. So as a specific example, just an average 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood in Oakland, California, where I live, is $1 million. In a dicey neighborhood, owning the same house is $300,000, 70% less, maybe $400,000. I don't know, but hugely less, and that is a huge difference in your life, in the freedom to do what you want to do. So the rational choice is to live in a somewhat dicey neighborhood. Just take reasonable precautions. Lock your doors. Don't saunter out at night in the middle of the street. It's a small price to pay. Education. There is no way I would spend much money on higher ed. I would, I'm not generalizing other people, so I'm just going to say for me, I would certainly not have gone to graduate school. The 6.5 years, even though I got a free ride and they paid me, subsidized housing, everything. It was my 6.5 years of the best years of my, my 20s. That was not a utilitarian, optimal use of my time. I love learning, but I would learn on a self-study basis. I think I probably would have gone to college because it did give me, and I did go to a public college, a very low-cost college. At that point, it was $34 a semester. But I was, because I did learn, I loved the general learning. I learned a lot about to appreciate art and music, and I got to write for the student newspaper and play baseball for the team, and probably would have gone to college, I guess, yes. And I learned a lot I liked philosophy. So, in any case, but the larger point is, I certainly wouldn't have spent big on education. There is whatever the benefits of yes, if I had gotten to Harvard, I would have gone, because that, in our silly society, brand name means so much. But I think short of that, I would have saved money. I would have gone to a community college if I went to college at all, because the teaching is actually better than at universities where the faculty is hired based on their research. Sought out the best teachers, asked questions, changed the assignment to match what I was passionate about. Education is overrated, and whatever the benefit of the designer label on a diploma is outweighed, often not only by the cost, but by its research centricity rather than teaching centricity. I'd rather stand on my merits, and I encourage you to save the money. Don't feel guilty just because your kid doesn't go to a brand name school. That's not what's going to matter. What's going to matter is whether the kid makes the most of the school, chooses the professors carefully, chooses extracurriculars well. Doesn't try to read everything, but really focus on what matters to that person. Anyway, that's rational in my judgment. A bit about materialism, beyond housing and education. It is so stupid, and I'm deliberately using the word stupid, that people would buy cars that break down more often and cost more because they have a fancy nameplate. And I'm speaking about Mercedes and BMW and Jaguar and Cadillac and all the rest of those. Toyotas and Subarus, and to a lesser extent Hondas, are wonderfully, wonderfully reliable and relatively inexpensive cars, despite our American government to try to get people to buy American. They've put huge tariffs on Japanese cars. It's irrational to get these unreliable luxury cars, or even an American car that breaks down more often. And of course, it's really rational to get a 3 or 4 year old car, because they lose half unless you have a lot of money, in which case, fine, buy a new one. But buying a 3 or 4 year old car saves you half the price, which again gives you freedom to do the work you want to do and to be more ethical, because you don't have if you've got this materialistic lifestyle, you've got these ethical temptations to cut corners. If you're not a spender, you have much more freedom to do what you want and be ethical. In particular, another silly example of humankind is jewelry. Nearly every person wants a diamond wedding ring, not a cubic zirconium, even though cubic zirconium costs about $1 or $2 for almost a perfect stone, a more perfect stone in many ways than a diamond. Costs, a beautiful cubic zirconium will cost you $5 or $10 if you buy it right, or $50 if you buy it wrong. The same diamond is going to cost $10,000 or whatever. Crazy. Watches are as accurate. The Casio for $10 or $20 is as accurate as the fancy brand name ones. And in fact, if I research, the fancy ones tend to need more maintenance. It's crazy. And yet people would spend on a Rolex or a Omega or whatever, Tag Heuer or all the fancy brands. Crazy. Travel. Yes, I know there are some people who just feel they derive much more benefit from the travel, notwithstanding the cost and the TSA and the COVID risk and the getting lost and whatever. They seem to like to be one with history or chat with the locals or eat in the Italian restaurant in Tuscany rather than in America. But rationally, it's crazy. If you want to see the world and you want to experience different things, you can experience enormous numbers of different people just by talking to people who are near where you live. Even if they're from the same background, same religion, same race, same ethnicity. Enormously different. My wife and I are of the same race and brought up in the same religious tradition, although we're both atheists. And yet we couldn't be more different in our values in many areas. And that's the person I married. So is travel really worth it? I don't think it's rational. You want to really do, tourism? There are amazing YouTube videos led by amazing people where you get to see the best stuff with no hassles for free. That's rational. Restaurants. I make fun of people who spend ridiculous amounts of money on fancy restaurants that really, if you attach a pleasure meter to your brain, the food doesn't taste any better. It just costs 10 times as much, and it's 50 times as valid what I've just said when it comes to wine. My favorite example is the story of a wine competition in France where they had these big wine experts, and they had, in one of the events, they had 3 wines in a brown paper bag or whatever, and they had all these experts taste them. And not surprisingly, the ratings were, varied. The different raters rated them differently. But what the punchline is, the 3 wines were the same. And these are the world famous wine experts, let alone us. And even if you could tell a difference, is it worth, $5, the taste difference in terms of the pleasure meter you attach to your brain? Are you going to get that much more pleasure out of a $100 wine or a $50 wine than a $5 bottle of wine from Trader Joe's? It's crazy. I try to be rational there. This is all about rational. I want to talk about investments briefly. The whole fucking investment industry tries to exercise your money, and forgive my using that word, because it's just I have such disrespect for most of the industry. They're all about making money off of you that you've worked hard for. The smart, I'm not a licensed financial advisor, just think of this as a personal opinion. I believe in investing in a Vanguard all-in-one fund. They come in different flavors, different amounts of risk tolerance. I am not bullish on America right now because we're in such a redistributive mode from forced taxation to voluntary belief and taking from those who have been the most contributory to those who have been less. That's not a formula for the stock market doing well. But so, there are flavors of these Vanguard all-in-one funds. I think one is called the Target Retirement Fund, and all called the Life Strategy Funds. But there are some that are all stocks, which are riskier, some that are almost all bonds, which are less risky, and some in the middle. Certainly choosing that, and they charge like about less than 1/5 of 1% per year. Vanguard is the good guy in the investment field. It sounds simplistic, but avoid the experts. They're not on commission. You call them or you visit their website, and you could do far worse, and most experts would agree, than investing your money simply every time you have an extra few $100, putting it in. Don't try to time the market. Just put it in a Vanguard all-in-one fund. Or I believe now that I am, as I said, I am bearish on America. I am bullish on India, particularly. They have a 100-year culture venerating intelligence and hard work, and yet it's still quite a poor country, and there are pockets of tremendous growth, but I think there is much more growth to occur in India. And my favorite of the ETFs, that is kind of a market basket of stocks, is Franklin India Fund, symbol FLIN. I like it because it invests. I believe that the future, unfortunately, is in large and mid-sized companies. They invest in that, and their expense ratio is only 0.19, which is less than 1/5 of 1% per year, and they're rated 4 stars on Morningstar. I'm investing money now in that ETF, Flynn, because I believe in the future of India, unfortunately, more than the future of America. Now, a small little thing in terms of efficiency and in rationality is music. Again, I want to go back to putting the pleasure meter on. I play piano, I play jazz, I can play all that stuff, but I think if people really had a pleasure meter attached to their brain, jazz, especially the improv solos, are not pleasurable to listen to. And a lot of modern music is not pleasant to listen to. And if you care about pleasure, I would say they're as crazy as it sounds, the music that's most pleasurable to listen to is easy listening music. I know that sounds crazy, and show tunes, especially overtures. If you listen to the overture to Oklahoma or Gypsy or Candide, they're available free on the internet. They're wonderful to listen to. And frankly, I think my piano playing, if you Google me and Marty Nemko and piano, and listen to some of my YouTubes I've made of my playing, are really pleasant to listen to. And if you want to be in a good mood, and again, now black gospel music has tended to be marginalized to black people. I love really good black gospel music, and my favorite is a guy who leads the New Life Choir, John P. Key, and my favorite song is I Won't Let Go. If you're in a bad mood, if you listen to that, you will get much pleasure. It's an antidepressant with no side effects. So my point is, I think you can be even rational about music instead of following the crowd and listening to what everybody thinks is cool. Now we're moving to the end here, and I want to talk about dying. I don't think many people would rationally want to suffer the end stage, horrible, painful disease. Some people are lucky, they just die in their sleep, but it's too few. And while I live in a state that has a relatively liberal policy about offing yourself when you're in the end stages and the pain is too much, I wish it was better. I really think if people, and I am very pro-choice, but if people should have the choice about whether to have a baby, they should have the choice of when to die. Even if they feel their life is empty, even if they're healthy. But they've got to be, say, over 50, not a teenager where there's so much. But if you're over 50 and you believe, you know what I see ahead of me is terrible. I'm unemployed, I'm lonely, I'm miserable, it's not going to change. Maybe I have a disease or whatever. It should be up to them, not the state, whether they should off themselves. And I believe there are a few countries that allow it, but certainly not here in the United States. I think Switzerland is probably one of the best for that. I think the rational thing is, for me, I'm grateful. Right now my life's great. I have no desire to die. But if I had some bad disease, I sure would want it to be easy for me to go to my doctor, and not just him give me the pills or her give me the pills, because the studies show that a large percentage of those don't work, and then you're left as an even worse shaped vegetable. But if the doctor injects you, it's pretty fail-safe, failure-proof. That's a rational approach. I'm hoping that hopefully 20 years from now, it's when I'll need it, that it will be easier to get a safe, pleasant visit to a permanent visit to La La Land. And finally, regarding death, the rational approach is this. It's not always so easy, but I used to be scared of death. I'm scared of dying, I'm scared of pain, but I'm not scared of death. Just as though I wasn't aware of what life was like before I was born, I'm not going to be aware of being dead after I die. So I'm not scared about death. And I like to think that's a rational approach. Anyway, I'm going to give a brief summary. My basic core philosophy of life is utilitarian. I try to make every decision, every moment, what's going to make the biggest difference to my sphere of influence. Two, and I apply that to everything from in terms of how much time to spend cooking, to what I spend my time working, to the people I spend it with. I try to, I'm always thinking about what is the right level of perfectionism. It would be, I could write some definitive biography of somebody or write some really deep book, but I think that there are too many of those books that end up empty on shelves. I'd rather do these kind of things that use my best skill, making these videos in complete honesty, which doesn't take a lot of time and hopefully is a utilitarian use of my time. I think education is wildly overrated, and so I would minimize my spend on that for myself or my kids, notwithstanding the social pressure, and that would often mean self-study, mentoring, getting mentored, watching YouTube videos, self-study like YouTube videos, and reading articles, and scanning books, not reading whole books, but scanning the most important parts, usually are the first and the introduction and the last chapter. Being not materialistic, especially around the big items that affect your choice of how you then can afford to spend your time: housing, education, and cars, jewelry, investments. Keeping it simple, not succumbing to the salespeople in the industry. Investing in, for example, a Vanguard all-in-one fund or an international ETF like Flynn, the Franklin India Fund. Don't necessarily follow the crowd in terms of entertainment. Choose the music that's going to give you the most pleasure. With regarding to, when you're at that stage when you're dying, or, find a doctor who is going to be sympathetic with at least stretching the law to the maximum extent possible, allowing you to choose when you want to die. And I'll stop there. In any event, I do thank you for watching or listening if you're listening to this on the podcast. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to this channel or to this podcast. And I like to end each of the podcasts with my favorite quote, which I believe is more important now than ever in this era of censorship of ideas that aren't consistent with the zeitgeist. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.